Steve Jackson Games has hired a self-admitted pervert as their lead game designer. Welcome to 2025.
I love this place!
Steve Jackson Games is starting to resemble Spawn Ranch more and more. Of course, you remember Spawn Ranch from Manson family fame. While Steve himself may not be physically blind like George Spawn, he certainly has a blind spot when it comes to the twisted ideology infiltrating his company. In many ways, he even embraces it. Now, Spawn ignored the growing danger of Charles Manson and his cult of unhinged followers, whom he welcomed into his home out of pity and a little bit of selfish desire. I wonder if Steve Jackson will one day regret inviting a new wave of peace and love charlatans who disguise their ideology of hate as virtue into his own home, so to speak. It's been a tragic decline for Steve Jackson Games over the last several years. Founded in 1980, the company brought us GURPS, Car Wars, Ogre, Munchkin, and many, many other games that left their mark on not just the role-playing world, but also the board game world, too. In 1990, Steve Jackson Games was raided by the U.S. Secret Service after a classified Bell telephone memorandum was found on one of their old electronic bulletin board servers. Steve fought back, won a lawsuit, and actually became a bit of an anti-establishment hero. But who could have guessed that 30 years later, he'd be siding with the kind of government overreach he once fought against. Like too many gaming companies, Steve Jackson Games has made its virtue signaling clear. While they aren't in Seattle, Washington, they are in the Seattle of Texas, Austin, of course. Steve recently cemented his leftist credentials by proudly signing his name to a list that ranks only behind Epstein's and Meghan's for pure shame. That would, of course, be the Gamers for Harris list, one that was so embarrassing it was quietly deleted off the internet after Kamala got beaten like a rented mule in November. But as we all know, the internet is forever, thank God. So, sorry, Steve, you just caught political herpes from one of the worst candidates in U.S. history. Deal with it. But that's just the start. Jackson seems determined to steer his company away from the classic old-school content that made it great, and instead embrace its feminine side. A while back, I covered his hiring of Allison Page as the company's managing editor. Now, there's nothing wrong with Allison, except for the fact, of course, that she openly despises her company's core audience of white men. Now, if only they could change that audience. More on that in just a moment. Now, I know some people will also say, I don't care who gets hired, as long as the game is good. But let's be real, when your managing editor has public views like these, how can it not rot the company from the inside? When someone is this zealous about their ideology, it'll bleed into the games they produce. That, of course, wasn't enough. Steve also hired Meredith Placco as the chief executive officer of his company. And while she hasn't been as publicly outspoken as Paige, the fact that she only posts on Blue Sky sort of says enough, if you know what I mean. But hey, at least we have that warm, inviting smile, don't we, fellas? It's clear that Steve is stepping back, leaving his company in the hands of women fully aligned with far-left ideology. And how is that working out so far? Well, as you can see, not very good. So after a bad year with Car Wars as one of their few successes, what does Steve Jackson Games do? Do they lean into what worked? Do they go back to their Illuminati roots? Maybe invest a little bit more into GURPS? Nope. Instead, they go all in on a cutesy, furry game made by a trans activist. That's right. Last week, Steve Jackson Games acquired Possum Creek and their family-friendly RPG, Wanderhome, which kind of screams drag queen story hour to me. And why is that? Well, joining the company as a lead game designer is none other than Wanderhome creator Jay Dragon, a man who claims to be just one of the girls, if you know what I mean, but is really just another unhinged lefty activist. And like every other mentally ill trans activist, sorry, I repeat myself there, Jay obsessively compares people who support border security, individual freedom, and small government to the bad guys from Germany in World War II. If you enjoy Norse mythology, congratulations, you're now alt-right, according to Jay. But wait, there's more. You see, Jay is a little bit of a self-admitted degenerate and weirdo. And, there's nothing concerning about someone like that making a kid's game, right? Jay is also obsessed with some nonsense concept called trans-feminized debt, a meaningless term concocted by yet another trans activist. Then there's his take on lines and veils, an RPG safety tool similar to the infamous X card. Now, even he thinks they might not be a good idea, but of course, he frames it in victimhood and trans misogyny. Again, a made-up term. The real reason he's against this particular safety tool, he actually wants to feel oppressed at the table. When, of course, the answer is why you should be against it, that it's just a game, of course. And just when you thought it couldn't get any worse, Jay reminisces about watching a homeless man take a dump on the Philly sidewalk. He admits he doesn't like seeing it, but doesn't really want to do anything about it either, which is very, very odd. This is the mindset of the people now running Steve Jackson Games. And if you still think it doesn't matter who actually makes the game, bro, as long as it's good, here's a little glimpse into the future. When Steve Jackson released a legacy edition of the Fantasy Trip, some of the new generation of gamers were outraged that the game encouraged the slaughtering of orcs. But don't worry, Jay is on the case, giving us a hint of things to come, promising to get in there and see what he can do. Get ready, as one of the early D&D competitors has all of its hard edges sanded off, too. So where does that leave you? Well, if you're not a committed leftist, this company, I think, kind of despises you, just as much as Wizards of the Coast, Paizo, Evil Hat, and Green Ronin. If anything, I'm doing them a favor by telling you to stop buying their stuff, because it's clear they don't want your money. They've decided their future lies with angry women, degenerate weirdos, and Animal Crossing RPGs. If you still want to play Car Wars, Ogre, or Munchkin, the older editions are readily available on the secondary market. Let Steve Jackson fade away, just like George Spahn, surrounded by jackals who are only keeping him around because his name is on the lease.
I don't know who you are, but you touched me today. You came to visit me. Now I gotta go back to sleep.